Recording. So here we are with another episode of You Can't Come Over, but You Can Come In. My guest today, I never thought I would get him on here, but he so graciously agreed to do it, is Bobby Bones.
Oh, thanks. What do you mean you couldn't get me on? I was like, yes. And then I didn't hear from you for a bit. And I was like, oh no. Then you were like, I didn't have internet. Sorry. So I'm happy to be here.
Oh, I'm so happy you're here. And I have to tell you why we were talking about who could we get on here that would be different. Not that the people we've had on here haven't been great. We've had great guests, but somebody that's not just a right down the middle singer-songwriter. And I said, what about Bobby Bones? And my social media guy was like, well, good luck. I mean, I don't know. And I said, oh, I'll ask him. And so I'm so happy you decided to do this. And the reason why I wanted you so bad is because, and I'm not trying to embarrass you, but I'm a huge fan of your podcast. And it's because you're one of the best interviewers I've ever heard. When I was on your podcast, I felt that way, but I feel it even more when I listen to friends of mine on there, because you always get to the heart, good or bad, of who someone is. Like, if I want to know who someone is and they're on your podcast and I don't know them, I feel like I get a real glimpse.
Well, I appreciate that. For me, I don't think it's any specific skill that I have other than I feel like if you've been through a lot, you can talk about that a lot with the people that have also been through it. And, the first thing I try to do is find commonalities. And, people that have been through some struggles, I don't shy around asking about it because I've been through some myself. And I think, the greatest thing that God ever gave me was empathy. And so I think that is, a big part of why a lot of my interviews do end up going really well. Not all of them do, obviously, but, I've really taken pride in being a good interviewer because I think like I care and I try to understand. And the biggest thing that I talk with people about, because people will come to me and say, hey, how do you do these interviews? Like other, broadcasters or podcasters. And I think I also listen. Like I'm not sitting there looking for the next question. What I'm doing is hearing what you have to say right now, being so secure in what I do, because, you're a very talented singer-songwriter. You probably get up there and you're just feeling it, not really having to predict anything because, you're so good at your job, you can just do it. And I feel that way about mine now at this point too. So, like I said, I think empathy is my greatest strength in interviewing, and I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, and you hit on what you said exactly why I have always felt that you were so good is that you are willing to talk about yourself. And people who will talk about themselves, especially in a vulnerable way, it opens other people up. So
yeah, I think people are always a little scared to dip their toe in the water, but if their buddy's in the water ahead of them and their buddy's already tested out the temperature, and I think it's a little easier to jump in. So yeah, that's always the goal of mine. And I'm really proud of my podcast, the Bobbycast, because I've also just gotten to know great people. How I do my show and my life here in Nashville is, I wrongfully, when I moved to town, I was like, I'm not making friends with anybody because I want to be completely objective. I want to have my opinion. I don't want to be clout. But what happens is, and this too, there's so many freaking good people around here that you end up meeting and you just go, wow, like I'm neglecting myself, the opportunity to have a more fruitful life, a more fulfilling life full of friendships if I continue living this way. So it's been, folks that I would have never met having adhered to those same rules, yourself included, that I'm able to, be friendly with or be friends with. And, I think for me, what I've gotten most out of that podcast was that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you can hear that. There are certain people you can tell that better than others, and it always gets me through a workout. I mean, that podcast, it's good. At one point, here's a funny thing I learned about podcasts is I was listening to it and I thought, man, he has just gotten so speedy. Like I just can't keep up with it. And then I was listening to, there was another podcast I was listening to and somebody asked me my opinion of it. It was a newer podcast. And I said, man, I just can't get past the host. It's just too much. And so when I started to feel that way about you, I all of a sudden I see this little thing that says 1.5 and I thought, oh, and I touched that and then it went to 2 and then I touched it again and it went to 1. And I was like, that's what's wrong. I called my friend who was in charge of this other podcast and said, don't listen to me. It's fine. I had it sped up. So I read your Wikipedia, which I hadn't done before this, and learned some things. And I never know what's true or what's not, but I was going to ask you, said that you wanted to be on radio from the age of 5. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, from being a kid, there were three things I wanted to do, which was be on the radio, be on TV, be a stand-up comic. And I'm one of the. I didn't know how blessed I was at that age to know what I wanted to do. I thought everybody
Mm-hmm.
just knew. They pursued it, they did or they didn't, and then the end. But that's really not what it is. So many of my friends have no idea still what they want to do, and I think that's great. We're all chasing different dreams in different ways, but I always I'm so lucky to be doing all three. I guess I'm not on the road doing comedy right now because of coronavirus, but I'm so lucky that I've been able to do all three at a pretty high level.
You sure have. And really quickly, like I saw that you went from your first full-time radio gig in 2002 to nationally syndicated in 2013 to
Yeah, it was.
here.
It, yeah, and Wikipedia, as you know, because I look at everybody's too, is always a little bit skewed. I
Mhm.
think my first, I started doing weekends when I was 17, so I guess that would have been 1997. And I didn't get hired to actually be on the air. I got hired to clean up the radio station and switch out a CD, and somebody got fired. And so they had to throw me on the air very quickly. And my real name's Bobby Estelle, but they were like, that's a terrible name for radio. So your name's either going to be Bobby Bones or Bobby Z. And so I picked Bobby Bones because at least it sounded like a person. I hated the name. I thought I sounded like a pirate or some sort of weird porn star or something. I didn't know really what it was, but I got thrown on the air and I was awful. But, getting started so early and to work weekends and overnight weekends, I was able to kind of develop how crappy I was and and even now I'm not the best broadcaster as far as like how fast I talk or I don't have that great of a voice. But, I did that. I did nights from when I was like 18 to 22, graduated college, which was important to me. And then I lived in Little Rock and did nights. I moved to Austin in 2003. And so when I moved to Austin, I was doing nights for a second, but the morning show there was a syndicated morning show and they weren't doing well. And they were going to flip the radio station to another format. And I said, hey, I'll do mornings and I won't really take any money, very little. So they put me on and it was kind of what saved the radio station. So, I started doing mornings when I was 22 years old, probably a little too early because I didn't know what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
But I was able, again, the same thing when I was 17, I was able to screw up so much and learn because there wasn't a lot of pressure on me then. Again, I was making no money. But what I did from, a couple years after that is I started to have some success in that I was bringing in friends to my radio show. And on my radio show, I don't have other radio professionals because we were so broke. I just brought in my friends. And so on my radio show now, Amy, my main co-host, she was selling granite. She'd never been on the radio. I was just like, hey, will you come in? Lunchbox was a delivery driver at Jason's Deli. So I was able to bring in all these people that put me in a better space and a better place to be funny or compelling because I was just with my friends, and it kind of created this new way of radio. And so here we are, we're a few years in, we sound way different than anybody else. We're on a bunch of pop stations, but I'm getting in so much trouble because I'm bringing on Dirks and I'm bringing on Willie Nelson and I'm bringing on Eli Young Band. And they're like, what format are you even? And I'm like, I don't even know what a format is. Like, I don't live my life strictly by a format with what I listen to or what I do. And so I said, but I'm from Arkansas and I was raised on country music. So a lot of my sensibilities are right there in that vein. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's weird, but I started to syndicate my own show with my own money. And there were some really lean years, but I kind of figured out a technology and went from 1 to 3 to 5 and was just about to break even. And the company was like, hey, we want to syndicate you. And I had like 22 affiliates. And so smash cut, here we are now. And that's the really, really quick version of my career.
I love that you touched on Lunchbox and Amy because that was one of the things I saw on the Wikipedia that I wanted to ask you about. It said that you had met Lunchbox at a bar and Amy at a Culver's. What was it? Was it just that they were your friends, or did they have some sort of talent that you felt, oh, they'd be good on air?
Well, I didn't know their talents, and I don't know that any of us are particularly great on air now. I think we're the best show, but I don't think it's because we're good at being on the radio. Because again, we don't speak well, we don't speak properly. But I met Amy, and she was funny to me and super warm. But when I was with her, I felt like I was a better version of me. Like she was dragging things out of me that no one else was. And with Lunchbox, the guy had no broadcasting experience. He left college 3 hours early. He was just a little off.
Uh-huh.
And I brought him in. He was coming in once a week. He never had his own microphone. He was just funny. And I was like, hey, why don't you stay? I can pay you minimum wage. And so he did. And all of us kind of took a risk, especially Amy. She had a good paying sales job and she
Mhm.
dropped it to come and, have faith in me. But Eddie, my video producer, and he's the other half of my comedy music group, he was just my friend from Austin who was producing some of my television work. And the other folks on the show are all old interns of mine. So, for whenever people ask, hey, how do you do your show? I never have the best example because I literally just hired my friends because I thought they made me better.
That's so great. It's such a great lesson. I did not know that. That's amazing. So speaking, I know that the comedy, being able to be out on the road is different because of COVID, but I wanted to ask, is there anything else? Well, I'm sure there's a lot, but about the radio show that's different because of COVID? Like, has your day changed much?
It's changed in that for a long time we were doing all of our shows in different houses.
Mm.
So I would be in my house, Amy would be in her house. We're in the studio now, but again, there's weird protocol. Like no one stops to talk to me. I walk down the hall, go right to my desk, which gets cleaned every day. And then when I leave, I get right out and come back to the house. And I'm not able to really leave the house except to go to work. And occasionally I'll go and like my girlfriend's sister got engaged. So we were there for that, but it was very socially distant. But I have my Nat Geo show. We should be 5 episodes in at this point. I just started a new show on Nat Geo, but all 4 of the episodes have been delayed because of COVID. We think in 2 weeks that we'll be able to fly to Montana and shoot our first episode. But if I get COVID, the production shuts down for 2 months. And it's not just me who can't work. It's the camera guys, the producers. So I feel a responsibility to, as much as I can, make sure that I'm not around folks and make sure that I'm not risking myself, because if it were just me, I would be like, I'll get it. I'll be fine. I'll fight through it. But I don't want other people to have a kind of a disadvantage of their livelihood because of what I'm doing.
Yeah. Boy, it's a crazy time. I mean, everything. I went into a studio, I was out in LA and did a piece on James Corden, and so had to film it at Village Studios. And it was like we were going into a laboratory to get in there. Like, bottom of our shoes had to be sprayed, waivers had to be signed, temperatures taken, all kinds of disinfectant. But it is just nuts the way this is going. I thought it was going to be 10 days when it started. I was
Right. Well, and my video producer, Eddie, who's, my best friend, he has coronavirus right now. And so
wrong.
he's been out of the show for 2 weeks. He got it on vacation because they went to Florida like knuckleheads. And
A lot of people in
you
Nashville
go to
have
Florida,
gone.
you just drive through, welcome to Florida, and you have it apparently. But he's and it won't clear his system. He has no symptoms, but until he tests negative, he can't come back to work. So he just sits at home and can't do anything because when he gets tested, it still says positive.
Oh, yeah, that's crazy. So I mean, you have climbed some impressive mountains, and I knew about. I mean, you know about these things, but then when you really look at them all together, 2 New York Times bestsellers, you won Dancing with the Stars, which is the most impressive thing to my mom. American Idol, hit syndicated morning show, Raging Idiots, this Nat Geo show. There's whispers of you running for governor of Arkansas. What is your next mountain?
I think at this point, I've been able to do what I wanted to do. I think the thing that I haven't done enough, and I've tried to do a lot of it, but I think I haven't dedicated myself fully to it, is to be more of a servant. If it's through what I'm doing now, great. If it's not, if it's to go back to Arkansas and at some point, it could be 6 years, it could be 2 years, who knows? If it's to run for governor and try to, because there are certain issues that I am extremely passionate about because it's things that I've been through, like food insecurity, right? And people don't have food to eat sometimes. I didn't have food to eat a lot of times. So I feel like now that I've been blessed enough to work to this point that it's time to turn up the amount that not only am I giving back financially, but that what my voice is doing, what my actions are doing. So it's things like food insecurity. It's things like a better living wage for folks. It's social justice. It's a lot of those things that I think growing up in the South and having Southern sensibilities, but also being pretty progressive at the same time when it comes to what's happening socially in our country. Like, I think it's the right time for me. Now, what that means, I don't know quite yet. But I think it's the right time for me to kind of walk down that path a little bit. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. Dancing with the Stars was a lot of fun. And I won, and it was crazy, and I was not a very good dancer. But that show, if anything, I tell people this all the time, it did two things for me. One, it showed me that, because when I went into that show, Vegas did the odds. I was the last. I was dead last. I was picked to go home first. I had the worst odds to win the show. And I was the worst dancer. But it showed me that if I spend the time dedicated to my craft, and it's okay to not be good at it, but as long as I'm moving a direction, I don't always move forward, but as long as I'm moving and putting in the work, sometimes when you go backward, you learn more than when you go forward. As long as I'm putting in the work and getting better, that something good was going to happen. And so that show showed me that I can go into something where I know nothing about it, but dedicate myself to it and win it. But it also showed me too that, that show wasn't just about dancing. If anything, it was about the people. Mm-hmm. And what I've been blessed with is an ability to talk to folks, not at people, but to and with people. And I used that on that show to win that show. And trivially, that show is goofy. It's Dancing with the Stars. But I learned so much about myself and the sociology of just getting folks to get on board that I think that was probably a big step too in me going, hey, I think I can actually do this on a macro level, more so than, what I'm doing now. I talked to 3-4 million people in the morning already. That's pretty macro. I think on a more substantive area. So that show was great for me for that reason.
I love that. I love that Dancing with the Stars led you to that. That's amazing. You have a lot of.
It gave me confidence, if anything.
We don't have 3 or 4 million people watching this YouTube show yet, but with what you just said, you probably got every vote on here. And you said something that led me to the last thing I wanted to touch on. I so appreciate you doing this little Q&A with me. But you mentioned Vegas, and I'm very interested in your poker career because I'm a big gambler myself. I can get myself into a lot of trouble, and I want to hear a little bit about that.
Well, so I've always been pretty good with numbers, and I never looked at poker as just a guessing game. It was always a probability game and a person game. And so you got to walk that line of what you value most at any given point. Mm-hmm. Versus person. And I got a little too consumed with it, honestly, where there was at one point when I was looking at the books on my bookshelf and it was Doyle Brunson. It was this system. It was that system. I was reading straight books. And so not that there was anything wrong with that, but I had like a real job I was trying to actually be good at too. And I was playing a lot of underground games in Texas, and I'd flown out right before I kind of called quits on it. I'd flown out to Vegas and played in this really big tournament at Treasure Island, and I won the whole freaking thing. It took me like 17 hours. And so I won thousands and thousands of dollars, and it was crazy. My friends were there, and we were celebrating. But I remember getting home and going, wow, I have all this money, and it's cool, but I'm not fulfilled by that one bit, and I just wanted. So I quit. I was like, no more. I have a really addictive personality anyway. I think it's probably genetic. So I quit. And just recently, I've started to play online with my friends only. I don't play because I can always sense when something's coming up that doesn't feel good inside of me. And so we play a little bit, and I've been doing all right, but I don't play for the thrill of winning the big pots anymore. But man, I did, and I loved it. I loved it. But I realized I love chasing it more than I love getting it.
Yeah.
And that's not a healthy place. That's not a healthy place for me to be, is to just love the chase and not the get. So yeah. How often are you playing?
Well, not at all right now, except for online. But I always say, you just said something about the chase. I always tell people who hate to gamble, and they're like, why do you like it? Like, you don't win most of the time and all this stuff. I'm like, well, the next best feeling to winning is losing, like,
right.
Really,
at least it's something.
I love cards. So that's what, I'm not even great with numbers. I love cards, and I do love trying to read people at the table. And I don't have a good poker face, because what I have found is when I actually go and sit in a real poker room with real players, if I get a good hand up front, I can win because they underestimate me. But then once I win, I'm screwed, because they know how to bluff me, and they know what I have, is what I should say. And I always want to see the flop. You know, that's another problem. Good players will throw away the first two cards real quick. Not me. I always want to see that flop.
I
So,
think what you do, I mean, I think anybody in any artistic world, though, too, we're gambling all the time, too, right? Like, we're
mhm.
betting on ourselves. The odds aren't with us. Play long enough, you can maybe drag a hand. Play long with good strategy, you may actually win a few big pots, and you really dedicate your career to it, and learn from really good people. And I think you can actually win. I think there's a lot to be said about that in gambling and arts and anything where you have to bet on yourself. And I think you, myself, a lot of our friends here in the creative community in Nashville, I think we all have a little bit of that in us, because if we didn't,
Hmm.
we couldn't do it.
Oh,
It's a nutty world that we're in.
it is. I mean, songwriting in itself is the ultimate lottery ticket. Every day you show up thinking I might have the numbers today. So yeah, I think anybody who stays in this long loves to gamble. And some of the best songwriters I know are huge gamblers.
With songwriting, it's always interesting, and maybe you could shed some light on this question. Where I have a friend who wrote a song a couple years ago, and it just got a hold like a week ago. He wrote it 2 years ago, and he's like, I just got a hold on a song I wrote 2 years ago and thought I didn't even remember writing it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, again, you're planting so many seeds constantly. What's the longest it's been when someone calls you and goes, "Hey, I have this song," or maybe your publisher calls and goes, "Hey, we have this song that just got put on hold," and you're like, "Man, I wrote that so long ago."
Great question. And for me, that I have a song that Reba recorded on her last record called Tammy Wynette Kind of Pain. And I don't know how old that song was, but it was old. And when we wrote it, it was one of those songs that everybody freaked out about, but it just didn't fit anybody. And then I started to make records, but it never really fit what I was doing. And then when it came around and I heard Reba recorded it, I was like, that makes sense. She's the voice that's supposed to bring that to the world. It's the right time in her career and her life. I mean, I'm a big believer in songs find their home when they're supposed to. And I've had a few that I've pushed to homes that they shouldn't have been in, and it never works out. So I think, man, I mean, that was probably 10 years. And that song,
Wow.
and that song didn't have a lot, it didn't have a bunch of activity. It was, like I
Wow.
said, people loved it at first, but went away real quick. And then boom, there it came.
Brett Eldridge and I are pretty good buds, and his last record is called Sunday Drive. There's the title track, Sunday Drive, that he was working as an intern for a publishing company, and he was taking songs, and this has got to be 10 years or so, because Brett's been around here for 8 or 9.
Hmm.
But he was taking songs, taking them from cassette and turning them into MP3 songs that have been submitted. And he found this song, Sunday Drive, then as an intern, and was like, man, if nobody ever cuts this, there's eventually going to be a time. And he just cut it, and he just put it on his record, and it's been probably 10 years. Isn't that insane?
It's totally insane. Garth Fundis, who, those of you that don't know who that is, amazing record producer, produced Don Williams, Keith Whitley, Trisha Yearwood, just to name a few. Keith Whitley recorded a song called Don't Close Your Eyes. It's one of my favorite songs of all time. Garth told me he heard that song 6 years before they recorded it. And he always knew, man, when the right person comes around, that song will do what it needs to do. And clearly it did.
Yeah, clearly.
So thank you so much, Bobby, for being on here. I want to thank you for the support you show artists, not just like me, but you really give everybody a fair and equal shot. Not everyone does that. You do that. Mostly, I just want to thank you for the inspiration you are. I mean, you talk about people being grinders. To me, you're the ultimate grinder. When you were doing American Idol, I thought, how is that guy doing this? Because I would see that you would be working out and doing all these different things. And mostly just thanks for being so honest about what you came from, because there are little kids out there, I'm going to get emotional, that don't know where their next meal is coming from, that don't have a solid parent, and see somebody like you and think I can end up somewhere. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. And, I used to be resentful for years and years of how I grew up and my situation as a whole. But as I've gotten older, I start to really appreciate the fact that I got to go through that, because,
Mm-hmm.
again, the greatest tool that I've ever been able to put on my belt is a tool of empathy, and
Mm-hmm.
to actually understand, if not someone's exact struggle, but a real struggle. And, with that, for a long time, it was like, why me? But now it's like, oh, I get why, because I'm supposed to do something with this. And so I appreciate you saying that. I think that's what makes my whole world revolve, is relating to folks, because I have no real talents other than that, Brandy. I'll be honest with you.
Well, other people would disagree, especially my mom with the Dancing with the Stars. But thank you so much for everything, and stay safe out there. If you go to
All right. Thank
Montana,
you.
stay real safe.
Thank you, Brandy. Good to talk to you.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.